All right, I just saw American Fiction, and it was a fun movie, I would say. Quite frankly, at times a hilarious movie. To talk about what the movie is, I'll read the IMDb plot summary. A novelist who's fed up with the establishment presenting black entertainment uses a pen name to write a book that propels him into the heart of hypocrisy and the madness he claims to disdain. This was a movie I was quite frankly really looking forward to. The trailers looked really funny. I heard great reviews and was really excited for it. And I would say I was a bit underwhelmed, despite the fact that I still do think this is a really interesting movie and one that was worth discussing here. I have kind of a lot I want to say about in spoilers, but in the pre-spoiler talk here, I'll get into spoilers at the end. I'll give you a warning beforehand. Don't worry. But some things about this movie really worked for me. In fact, all of the kind of the talks. So kind of the thesis of this movie in a lot of ways is a lot of times the stories about black Americans that get told are kind of, about the more, underprivileged and sort of, I don't know, gangster type stories, stories where people are, not very well off. Things aren't going well for them. I guess we could just say it that way, right? Which definitely there is a good chunk of stories that are like that, right? And especially historically, that's been a real issue. Is that I know when Spike Lee started making movies, it was almost like a novel concept that he was casting black people that weren't drug dealers in their roles, right? That's kind of an aspect that for a lot of filmmakers, that is a real thing. For a lot of writers, that is a real thing. And, it's as we have our main character, Jeffrey Wright, in this movie say at one point, it's, we're talking about his own book. They said, we want a black book. And he said, this is a black book. I'm black and I wrote it. And that is something that feels like this movie is kind of about in a lot of ways. It's quote unquote black entertainment doesn't just have to be about gangsters. It can be about, like in this movie, a family of doctors, and one of them's a writer and trying to get into, get a book being published successfully, right? That's kind of what this movie is about. And to be honest, I thought it completely nailed all of that aspect of the film. I had really no notes and a lot of positive stuff to take away from it. To me, where this movie kind of, why I'm maybe having a little bit more negative tone than you might expect, is there's also a lot of family drama stuff that I just wasn't as into. I was usually waiting for them to get back to the book stuff when that stuff was happening. It almost felt like two separate movies at times. It just wasn't really that fascinating for me. So while I wouldn't say that there was nothing of value gained from that, and again, I do think that at the end of the day, if a movie's going to be this funny, I'll sit through the more maybe boring moments that I did think this film had as well. Although I definitely think I was maybe hoping for a little bit more. I think I went in with too high expectations. I did, which is unfair to the movie. The movie is just a movie. I thought I was like, this might be the best movie of the year walking in. And it's like, a movie's almost never going to live up to that hype. So that's on me, because I was very excited about it. That being said, again, a lot of really interesting stuff here. We can talk about the performances, I suppose. I've never been, I don't know, performances are great, but I've never been crazy about, like, when I watch people talk about movies, sometimes they'll spend, like, forever on specific performances. Performances are very good. I thought Jeffrey Wright was fantastic. He should probably get nominated for an Oscar. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he does. So, there's definitely that. I also thought that this writing at times was just fantastic. There were times when this felt like, I don't know, like a Noah Baumbach written script or stuff like that. It was that tight at times, and there is some interesting credits that Cord Jefferson has as a writer. The Watchmen miniseries, which I never watched, but I've heard was I think I heard that was good. Maybe I'm wrong, but The Good Place, which was a show I really liked. He wrote 25 episodes of that, so a lot of stuff there. Also was credited as a story editor for 10 episodes in Master of None, which was a show I enjoyed as well. So has some fascinating credits, and I think this one was probably the best thing I've seen from him personally as a writer. This is his first time directing anything, so the direction was fine. I wasn't blown away by anything, but you know what? It didn't have to be. It was sort of a comedy. It really was a comedy at the end of the day. Like, I don't know. I don't need you to do some crazy stuff. Just, film the movie the way it makes sense to be filmed. No complaints there. It wasn't, it was fine. Good job there, I suppose. So that is my overall thoughts on this movie. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. And now let's get into spoilers and talk about the good and the bad of this movie in a bit more detail. So I actually want to start off with the good and talk about kind of analyzing it and getting a little bit more deeper into what I think this film is trying to say. And I actually think it handled it in a much more nuanced way than I would. You can see this. You can easily see this being kind of like eye-rolling if it's done poorly, right? It's definitely something where if you are trying to talk about a very serious issue, which is, race relations in America, and especially race storytelling in America, race-based storytelling in America, that's, can easily step on people's toes. But I thought this one did it in a very unique way so it starts off with Jeffrey Wright's character, who, he kind of, throughout this movie, he sees, Issa Rae's character, who is another writer who talks very proper and comes from a privileged background, but when she reads from her books, it is, very stereotypically Black, right? That's kind of, that's an early scene, and he counts at that and says, okay, well, what's she doing? Is she just trying to use this to, kind of steer into the stereotype to make sure that she can sell books? That's what he believes to be happening. But I think later to have a showdown, and it's interesting because that's his perspective on it, but the movie doesn't necessarily entirely take his side, because then she says, well, hey, a lot of writers talk about underprivileged people. Like, that's not just specifically a Black thing. That's oftentimes interesting storytelling, is talk about poor people. And he kind of responds and says, yeah, but when these are the only Black books that are getting published, well, that's where it gets frustrating. And she kind of said, yeah, but that's not my fault. And it's an interesting back and forth that they have that I do find to be a very interesting question about where do you put the blame on all of these types of things, and is it really fair to blame Issa Rae's character? And I don't know, me personally, I don't quite think it is. I think it is fair to blame the consumer for not being willing to read Jeffrey Wright's fake book in this, Jeffrey Wright's book, which in the movie is real, which is, very kind of in-depth, but that's just not what tends to sell as well. John Ortiz's character at one point, who plays Arthur, he plays the the business manager guy. He makes a comparison of there's 3 different kinds of whiskey, right? And it's all made by the same company. This one is kind of the high end stuff. This one is the low end stuff. But some people just want to get drunk, so that's why the low end stuff sells better. But it's still good to have the high end stuff as well. Kind of using that as a comparison for book writing, which I find to be kind of an interesting topic of discussion. This movie ends. Talk about the actual ending. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. Because so the way the movie ends is the book that Jeffrey Wright writes, Jeffrey Wright's character, Monk, writes in this book. He writes it under a pen name. It's very funny stuff, all of that stuff. 10 out of 10 for that. That was fantastic. But he writes a book. It gets sold. It wins the award for, best book or whatever. I don't know what the award is, but it wins some sort of award. Jeffrey Wright goes up to give a speech, so it seems like he's going to reveal that he was the one who wrote the book, because he hasn't told anybody at this point that he's the one who wrote the book. He's going to give a speech, maybe talk about, kind of almost basically the climax of the movie, and then it cuts to black, and then it goes to him talking to a producer, and he's saying yeah, that could be how that movie could end, and he's like, no, that's not how the movie should end. It should end different ways. And the movie does make it very clear. It's like, okay, no, we didn't just watch an entire explanation of that. It doesn't seem. It seems like, or maybe we did. I don't know. Maybe that is what happened. My kind of assumption was that everything we saw up until the sort of the banquet was real, but then the banquet aspect, that's him telling it. But maybe the whole thing we saw was just his pitch for the movie, and none of that is really as real, but just based on his life. I don't know. There's the obvious comparison I had for this movie, which is one of my favorite movies, Robert Altman's The Player. So spoiler alert for The Player if you haven't seen that either, which I highly recommend. I think it's a fantastic movie, one of my favorites. But the endings are very similar in those movies, right? If you haven't seen Robert Altman's The Player but don't care about spoilers, that movie ends with kind of a reveal that the entire movie we're watching is based on a different story, but this movie just got made so that way, he won't get reported to the police for murder, essentially. It sounds a bit weird if you haven't seen the movie, but it makes sense in the context of the movie. This one kind of had a very similar feel to it of this is just sort of, this is the movie. It's not the movie itself, but kind of the movie that had to get made, and there's a true story behind it kind of feel to it, which I don't know, might have worked better for me if I hadn't already seen it in the player, which I thought it was done a little bit smoother there. But there was one part I really loved. The ending itself. Jeffrey Wright, he's in a car with his brother, played by Sterling K. Brown, who's a very fun character. All the family, Tracy Ellis Ross, very fun as well. A lot of fun actors in this movie. But, they're in the car at the end, and Jeffrey Wright looks over and sees somebody who's clearly playing a slave. He's in that kind of outfit, that costume there, and they kind of have an acknowledgement where it kind of just feels like they both kind of know this isn't really what they perfectly want to be doing. They would rather be doing things a little bit differently, because Jeffrey Wright, kind of the ending is he decides that the book can end with him getting shot and killed by the police, because that seems to be how a lot of these things end up ending, because that's a way to sell it to white audiences. And so he kind of, sells out a little bit at the end there, just like, playing a slave, mostly to do that for white audiences, which is a thing that for film history goes back a really long ways, goes back 100 years at this point of, if not 100 years, at least close to 100 years of people basically, black people, the only way they can get into the business way back in the day was by having to play a slave. It's both of them kind of saying like, yeah, at the end of the day, we're telling these black stories for a white audience. But at the same time, we're making money doing it, and at least we're able to get the stories out there, even if it's not in an ideal scenario, which I found to be very fascinating. So again, kind of brushed over it. My negatives, just a lot of family stuff. Could have done without. Could have made this 15 minutes shorter, 20 minutes shorter, maybe even 30 minutes shorter, gotten rid of all that stuff. I didn't need most of it, to be honest. But at the end of the day, there were some fun parts. And the movie, I think the good parts of the movie more than outweighed the bad parts of it. So I would still, if you watched all this and, you didn't think you weren't sold when I gave my rating, but now are sold, well, hopefully I would still recommend go out and watch it. It's in theaters now. That is American Fiction. Let me know what you think if you've seen it in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.